Magician's Gambit by David Eddings. Prologue. Being an account of how Gorim sought a god for his people, and of how he found Ul upon the sacred mountain of Prolgu, based upon the Book of Ulgo and other fragments. At the beginning of days, the world was spun out of darkness by the 7 gods, and they also created beasts and fowls, serpents and fishes, and lastly, man. Now there dwelt in the heavens a spirit known as Ul, who did not join in this creation. And because he withheld his power and wisdom, much that was made was marred and imperfect. Many creatures were unseemly and strange. These the younger gods sought to unmake, so that all upon the world might be fair. But Ul stretched forth his hand, and prevented them, saying, What you have wrought, you may not unmake. You have torn asunder the fabric and piece of the heavens, to bring forth this world as a plaything, and an entertainment. Know, however, that whatsoever you make, be it ever so monstrous, shall abide as a rebuke for your folly. In the day that one thing which you have made is unmade, all shall be unmade. The younger gods were angered. To each monstrous or unseemly thing that they had made, they said, Go thou to Ul, and let him be thy god. Then from the races of men, each god chose that people which pleased him. And when there were yet peoples who had no god, the younger gods drove them forth and said, Go unto Ul, and he shall be your god. And Ul did not speak. For long and bitter generations, the godless ones wandered and cried out unheard in the wastelands and wilderness of the west. Then there appeared among their numbers a just and righteous man named Gorim. He gathered the multitudes before him and spoke to them. We wither and fall as the leaves from the rigors of our wanderings. Our children and our old men die. Better it is that only one shall die. Therefore stay here and rest upon this plain. I will search for the god named Ul, so that we may worship him and have a place in this world. For 20 years Gorim sought Ul, but in vain. Yet the years passed. His hair turned gray, and he wearied of his search. In despair he went up onto a high mountain and cried in a great voice to the sky, No more. I will search no longer. The gods are a mockery and deception, and the world is a barren void. There is no Ul, and I am sick of the curse and affliction of my life. The spirit of Ul heard and replied, Why art thou wroth with me, Gorim? Thy making and thy casting out were none of my doing. Gorim was afraid and fell upon his face, and Ul spoke again, saying, Rise, Gorim, for I am not thy god. Gorim did not arise. O my God, he cried, hide not thy face from thy people, who are sorely afflicted because they are outcast, and have no god to protect them. Rise, Gorim, Ul repeated, and quit this place. Cease thy complaining. Seek thou a god elsewhere, and leave me in peace. Still, Gorim did not rise. O my God, I will still abide. Thy people hunger and thirst. They seek thy blessing and a place where they may dwell. Thy speech wearies me, Ul said, and he departed. Gorim remained on the mountain, and the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air brought him sustenance. For more than a year he remained. Then the monstrous and unseemly things which the gods had made came and sat at his feet, watching him. The spirit of Ul was troubled, At last he appeared to Goram. "Abidest thou still?" Goram fell on his face and said, "O my God, thy people cry unto thee in their affliction." The spirit of Ul fled. But Goram abode there for another year. Dragons brought him meat, and unicorns gave him water. And again Ul came to him, asking, "Abidest thou even still?" Goram fell on his face. "O my God, thy people perish in the absence of thy care." And Ul fled from the righteous man. Another year passed, while nameless, unseen things brought him food and drink. And the spirit of Ul came to the high mountain and ordered, "Rise, Goram." From his prostrate position, Goram pleaded, "O my God, have mercy." "Rise, Goram," Ul replied. He reached down and lifted Goram up with his hands. "I am Ul, thy God. I command thee to rise and stand before me." "Then wilt thou be my God, and God unto my people?" "I am thy God, and the God of thy people also." Goram looked down from his high place and beheld the unseemly creatures which had cared for him in his travail. "And what of these, O my God? Wilt thou be God unto the basilisk, and the minotaur, the dragon, and the chimera, the unicorn, and the things unnamed, the winged serpent, and the thing unseen? For these are also outcast. Yet there is beauty in each. Turn not your face from them, my God. For in them is great worthiness. They were sent to thee by the younger gods. Who will be their God if you refuse them?" "It was done in my despite. These creatures were sent unto me to bring shame upon me, that I had rebuked the younger gods. I will in no wise be God unto monsters." The creatures at Goram's feet moaned. Goram seated himself on the earth and said, "Yet will I abide, O my God." "Abide, if it please thee," Ul said, and departed. It was even as before. Goram abode, the creatures sustained him, and Ul was troubled. And before the holiness of Goram, the great God repented and came again. "Rise, Goram, and serve thy God." Ul reached down and lifted Goram. "Bring unto me the creatures who sit before thee, and I will consider them. If each hath beauty and worthiness, as thou sayest, then will I consent to be their God also." Then Goram brought the creatures before Ul. The creatures prostrated themselves before the god and moaned to beseech his blessing. Ul marveled that he had not seen the beauty of each creature before. He raised up his hands and blessed them, saying, "I am Ul, and I find beauty and worthiness in each of you. I will be your God, and you shall prosper, and peace shall be among you." Goram was glad of heart, and he named that high place where all had come to pass Prologue, which means holy place. Then he departed and returned to the plain to bring his people unto their God. But they did not know him, for the hands of Ul had touched him, and all color had fled, leaving his body and hair as white as new snow. The people feared him and drove him away with stones. Goram cried unto Ul, "O my God, thy touch has changed me, and my people know me not." Ul raised his hand, and the people were made colorless like Goram. The spirit of Ul spoke to them in a great voice, "Hearken unto the words of your God. This is he whom you call Goram, and he has prevailed upon me to accept you as my people, to watch over you, provide for you, and be God over you. Henceforth shall you be called Ulgo, in remembrance of me, and in token of his holiness. You shall do as he commands, and go where he leads. Any who fail to obey him, or follow him, will I cut off to wither and perish and be no more." Gorim commanded the people to take up their goods, and their cattle, and follow him to the mountains. But the elders of the people did not believe him, nor that the voice had been the voice of Ul. They spoke to Gorim in despite, saying, "If you are the servant of the god Ul, perform a wonder in proof of it." Gorim answered, "Behold, your skin and hair. Is that not wonder enough for you?" They were troubled, and went away. But they came to him again, saying, "The mark is upon us, because of a pestilence which you brought from some unclean place, and no proof of the favor of Ul." Gorim raised his hands, and the creatures which had sustained him came to him like lambs to a shepherd. The elders were afraid, and went away for a time. But soon they came again, saying, "The creatures are monstrous and unseemly. You are a demon, sent to lure the people to destruction, not a servant of the great god Ul. We still have seen no proof of the favor of Ul." Now Gorim grew weary of them. He cried in a great voice, "I say to the people that they have heard the voice of Ul. I have suffered much in your behalf. Now I return to Prologue, the holy place. Let him who would follow me do so. Let him who would not remain." He turned and went toward the mountains. Some few people went with him, but the greater part of the people remained, and they reviled Gorim and those who followed him. "Where is this wonder which proves the favor of Ul? We do not follow or obey Gorim, yet neither do we wither and perish." Then Gorim looked upon them in great sadness, and spoke to them for the last time. "You have besought a wonder from me. Then behold this wonder. Even as the voice of Ul said, you are withered like the limb of a tree that is cut off. Truly, this day you have perished." And he led the few who followed him into the mountains and to Prologue. The multitude of the people mocked him and returned to their tents to laugh at the folly of those who followed him. For a year they laughed and mocked. Then they laughed no more. For their women were barren and bore no children. The people withered, and in time they perished and were no more. The people who followed Gorim came with him to Prologue. There they built a city. The spirit of Ul was with them, and they dwelt in peace with the creatures who had sustained Gorim. Gorim lived for many lifetimes, and after him each high priest of Ul was named Gorim, and lived to a great age. For 2,000 years the peace of Ul was with them, and they believed it would last forever. But the evil god Torak stole the orb that was made by the god Aldur, and the war of men and gods began. Torak used the orb to break the earth asunder and let in the sea, and the orb burned him horribly. And he fled into Meloria. The earth was maddened by her wounding, and the creatures which had dwelt in peace with the people of Ulgo were also maddened by that wounding. They rose against the fellowship of Ul, and cast down the cities and slew the people, until few remained. Those who escaped fled to Prologue, where the creatures dared not follow for fear of the wrath of Ul. Loud were the cries and lamentations of the people. Ul was troubled, and he revealed to them the caves that lay under Prologue. The people went down into the sacred caves of Ul, and dwelt there. In time, Belgariad, the sorcerer, led the kings of the Alorns and his sons into Meloria to steal back the orb. When Torak sought to pursue, the wrath of the orb drove him back. Belgariad gave the orb to the first Raven king, saying that so long as one of his descendants held the orb, the west would be safe. Now the Elorns scattered and pushed southward into new lands, and the peoples of other gods were troubled by the war of gods and men, and fled to seize other lands which they called by strange names. But the people of Ul held to the caverns of Prologue, and had no dealings with them. Ul protected them and hid them, and the strangers did not know that the people were there. For century after century, the people of Ul took no note of the outer world, even when that world was rocked by the assassination of the last Raven king and his family. But when Torak came ravening into the west, leading a mighty army through the lands of the children of Ul, the spirit of Ul spoke with the Gorim, and the Gorim led forth his people in stealth by night. They fell upon the sleeping army, and wreaked mighty havoc. Thus the army of Torak was weakened, and fell in defeat before the armies of the west, at a place called Vomimbre. Then the Gorim girded himself, and went forth to hold counsel with the victors. And he brought back word that Torak had been gravely wounded. Though the evil god's body was stolen away and hidden by his disciple Belzedar, it was said that Torak would lie bound in sleep like death itself, until a descendant of the Raven line should again sit upon the throne at Riva, which meant never, since it was known that no descendants of that line lived. Shocking as the visit of the Gorim to the outer world had been, no harm seemed to come of it. The children of Ul still prospered under the care of their god, and life went on almost as before. It was noticed that the Gorim seemed to spend less time studying the Book of Ulgo, and more searching through moldy old scrolls of prophecy. But a certain oddity might be expected of one who had gone forth from the caverns of Ul into the world of other peoples. Then a strange old man appeared before the entrance to the caverns, demanding to speak with the Gorim, and such was the power of his voice that the Gorim was summoned. Then, for the first time since the people had sought safety in the caverns, one who was not of the people of Ul was admitted. The Gorim took the stranger into his chambers, and remained closeted with him for days. And thereafter, the strange man, with the white beard and tattered clothing, appeared at long intervals, and was welcomed by the Gorim. It was even reported once by a young boy that there was a great gray wolf with the Gorim, but that was probably only some dream, brought on by sickness, though the boy refused to recant. The people adjusted, and accepted the strangeness of their Gorim, and the years passed, and the people gave thanks to their God, knowing that they were the chosen people of the great god Ul. Part 1. Maragor. Chapter 1. Her Imperial Highness, Princess Tinedra, jewel of the House of Borun, and the loveliest flower of the Tolnedran Empire, sat cross-legged on a sea-chest in the oak-beamed cabin beneath the stern of Captain Graldic's ship, nibbling thoughtfully on the end of a tendril of her coppery hair, as she watched the Lady Palgura attend to the broken arm of Belgariad, the sorcerer. The princess wore a short, pale-green dryad tunic, and there was a smudge of ash on one of her cheeks. On the deck above, she could hear the measured beat of the drum that paced the oar-strokes of Graldic's sailors as they rowed upstream from the ash-choked city of Stithistor. It was all absolutely dreadful, she decided. What had begun as merely another move in the interminable game of authority and rebellion against it that she had been playing with her father, the Emperor, for as long as she could remember, had suddenly turned deadly serious. She had never really intended for things to go this far when she and Master Jeebers had crept from the imperial palace in Tolhanath that night so many weeks ago. Jeebers had soon deserted her. He had been no more than a temporary convenience anyway, and now she was caught up with this strange group of grim-faced people from the north in a quest she could not even understand. The Lady Palgura, whose very name sent a chill through the princess, had rather bluntly informed her in the Wood of the Dryads that the game was over, and that no evasion, wheedling, or coaxing would alter the fact that she, Princess Tinedra, would stand in the Hall of the Raven King on her 16th birthday, in chains, if necessary. Tenedra knew with absolute certainty that Lady Polgara had meant exactly that, and she had a momentary vision of being dragged, clanking and rattling in her chains, to stand in the total humiliation in that grim hall where hundreds of bearded Aelorns laughed at her. That had to be avoided at any cost. And so it had been that she had been accompanying them, not willingly, perhaps, but never openly rebellious. The hint of steel in Lady Polgara's eyes always seemed to carry with it the suggestion of manacles and clinking chains, and that suggestion cowed the princess into obedience far more than the imperial power her father possessed had ever been able to do. Tenedra had only the faintest idea of what these people were doing. They seemed to be following someone or something, and the trail had led them here, into the snake-infested swamps of Nyssa. Murgos seemed to be somehow involved, throwing frightful obstacles in their path, and Queen Salmistra also seemed to take an interest, even going so far as to have young Geryon abducted. Tenedra interrupted her musing to look across the cabin at the boy. Why would the Queen of Nyssa want him? He was so ordinary. He was a peasant, a scullion, a nobody. He was a nice enough boy, certainly, with rather plain sandy hair that kept tumbling down across his forehead, making her fingers itch to push it back. He had a nice enough face, in a plain sort of way. And he was somebody she could talk to when she was lonely or frightened, and somebody she could fight with when she felt peevish, since he was only slightly older than she was. But he completely refused to treat her with the respect due her. He probably didn't even know how. Why all this excruciating interest in him? She pondered that, looking thoughtfully at him. She was doing it again. Angrily she jerked her eyes from his face. Why was she always watching him? Each time her thoughts wandered, her eyes automatically sought out his face, and it wasn't really that exciting a face to look at. She had even caught herself making up excuses to put herself into places where she could watch him. It was stupid. Tenedra nibbled at her hair and thought and nibbled some more, until once again her eyes went back to their minute study of Geryon's features.
"Is he going to be all right?"
Barak, the Earl of Trelheim, rumbled, tugging absently at his great red beard as he watched the Lady Polgara putting the finishing touches on Belgarath's sling. "It is a simple break," she replied professionally, putting away her bandages, "and the old fool heals fast." Belgarath winced as he shifted his newly splinted arm.
"You didn't have to be so rough, Paul."
His rust-colored old tunic showed several dark mud smears, and a new rip, evidence of his encounter with the tree. "It had to be set, Father. You did not want to heal crooked, did you?"
"I think you actually enjoyed it,"
he accused. "Next time you can set it yourself," she suggested coolly, smoothing her gray dress.
"I need a drink,"
Belgarath grumbled to the hulking Barak. The Earl of Trelheim went to the narrow door.
"Would you have a tankard of ale brought for Belgarath?"
he asked the sailor outside. "How is he?" the sailor inquired.
"Bad-tempered, and he'll probably get worse if he doesn't get a drink pretty soon."
"I'll go at once," the sailor said.
Wise decision."
This was yet another confusing thing for Tenedra. The noblemen in their party all treated this shabby-looking old man with enormous respect. But so far as she could tell, he didn't even have a title. She could determine with exquisite precision the exact difference between a baron and a general of the imperial legions, between a Grand Duke of Tenedra and a Crown Prince of Orindia, between the Raven Warder and the King of the Chereks. But she had not the faintest idea where sorcerers fit in. The materially oriented mind of Tenedra refused even to admit that sorcerers existed. While it was quite true that Lady Polgara, with titles from half of the kingdoms of the West, was the most respected woman in the world, Belgariad was a vagabond, a vagrant, quite frequently a public nuisance, and Geryon, she reminded herself, was his grandson. "I think it's time you told us what happened, Father," Lady Polgara was saying to her patient.
"I'd really rather not talk about it," he replied shortly.
She turned to Prince Keldar, the peculiar little Drasnian nobleman with the sharp face and sardonic wit, who lounged on a bench with an impudent expression on his face. "Well, Silk?" "I'm sure you can see by my position, old friend," the prince apologized to Belgariad, with a great show of regret. "If I try to keep secrets, she'll only force things out of me. Unpleasantly, I imagine." Belgariad looked at him with a stony face, then snorted in disgust. "Oh, it's not that I want to say anything, you realize?" Belgariad turned away. "I knew that you'd understand."
"The story, Silk,"
Barak insisted impatiently. "Oh, it's really very simple," Keldar told him.
"But you're going to complicate it, right?"
"Just tell us what happened, Silk." The Drasnian sat up on his bench. "It's not really much of a story. We located Zedar's trail and followed it down into Nyessa about 3 weeks ago. We had a few encounters with some Nyessan border guards. Oh, nothing very serious. Anyway, the trail of the orb turned east, almost as soon as it crossed the border. That was a surprise. Zedar had been headed for Nyessa with so much single-mindedness that we had both assumed that he'd made some kind of arrangement with Salmisra. Maybe that's what he wanted everyone to think. Oh, he's very clever, and Salmisra's notorious for involving herself in things that don't really concern her." "I have attended to that," Lady Polgara said somewhat grimly.
"What happened?"
Belgariad asked her. "I will tell you about it later, Father. Go on, Silk." Silk shrugged. "There isn't a great deal more to it. We followed Zedar's trail into one of those ruined cities up near the old Marag border. Belgariad had a visitor there. At least, he said he did. I didn't see anyone. At any rate, he told me that something had happened to change our plans, and that we were going to have to turn around and come downriver to Stithis Tor to rejoin all of you. He didn't have time to explain much more, because the jungles were suddenly alive with Murgos, either looking for us or for Zedar. We never found out which. Since then, we've been dodging Murgos, and Naessans both, traveling at night, hiding, that sort of thing. We sent a messenger once. Did he ever get through?" "The day before yesterday," Polgara replied. "He had a fever, though, and it took a while to get your message from him." Keldar nodded. "Anyway, there were Grolums with the Murgos, and they were trying to find us with their minds. Belgariad was doing something to keep them from locating us that way. Whatever it was must have taken a great deal of concentration, because he wasn't paying too much attention to where he was going. Early this morning, we were leading the horses through a patch of swamp. Belgariad was sort of stumbling along with his mind on other things, and that was when the tree fell on him." "I might have guessed," Polgara said. "Did someone make it fall?" "Oh, I don't think so. It might have been an old deadfall, but I rather doubt it. It was rotten at the center. I tried to warn him, but he walked right under it."
"All right," Belgariad said.
"I did try to warn you."
"Don't belabor it, Silk."
"I wouldn't want them to think that I didn't try to warn you," Silk protested. Polgara shook her head and spoke with a profound note of disappointment in her voice. "Father."
"Just let it lie, Polgara."
"I dug him out from under the tree and patched him up as best as I could. Then I stole that little boat, and we started downriver. We were doing fine, until all of this dust started falling."
"What did you do with the horses?" Hedar asked.
Senedra was a little afraid of this tall, silent Algar lord. She looked at his shaved head, his black leather clothing, and his flowing black scalp lock. He never seemed to smile, and the expression on his hawk-like face at even the mention of the word Maragor was as bleak as stone. The only thing that even slightly humanized him was his overwhelming concern for horses. "They're all right," Silk assured him. "I left them picketed, where the Naisans won't find them. They will be fine where they are until we can pick them up." "You said when you came aboard that Tuchek has the orb now?" Belgariad said to Belgariad. "How did that happen?"
The old man shrugged. Beltira didn't go into any of the details. All he told me was that Tuchek was waiting when Zadar crossed the border into Kazal Murgos. Zadar managed to escape, but he had to leave the orb behind.
"Did you speak with Beltira?"
"With his mind," Belgariad answered.
"Did he say why the Master wants us to go to the Vale?"
"No. It probably never occurred to him to ask. You know how Beltira is."
"It's going to take months, Father," Belgariad objected with a worried frown. "It is 250 leagues to the Vale."
"Aldur wants us to go there. I'm not going to start disobeying him after all of these years."
"And in the meantime, Tuchek's got the orb at Raktul."
"It's not going to do him any good, Paul. Torak himself could not make the orb submit to him, and he tried for over 2,000 years. I know where Raktul is. Tuchek cannot hide it from me. He will be there with the orb when I decide to go and take it away from him. I know how to deal with that magician."
He said the word magician with a note of profound contempt in his voice. "What's Zadar going to be doing all of that time?"
"Zadar has got problems of his own. Beltira says that he's moved Torak from the place where he had him hidden. I think we can depend on him to keep Torak's body as far away from Rakthul as possible. Actually, things have worked out rather well. I was getting a little tired of chasing Zadar anyway."
Sinedra found all of this a bit confusing. Why were they all so caught up in the movements of a strangely named pair of Engarak sorcerers and this mysterious jewel which everyone seemed to covet? To her, one jewel was much the same as another. Her childhood had been surrounded by such opulence that she had long since ceased to attach much importance to ornaments. At the moment, her only adornment consisted of a pair of tiny gold earrings shaped like little acorns, and her fondness for them arose not so much from the fact that they were gold, but rather from the tinkling sound the cunningly contrived clappers inside them made when she moved her head. All of this sounded like one of the Aelorn myths she had heard from a storyteller in her father's court years before. There had been a magic jewel in that, she remembered. It was stolen by the god of the Angaraks, Torak, and rescued by a sorcerer and some Aelorn kings, who put it on the pommel of a sword kept in the throne room at Reva. It was somehow supposed to protect the West from some terrible disaster that would happen if it were lost. Curious, the name of the sorcerer in that legend was Belgariad, the same as that of this old man. Oh, but that would make him thousands of years old, which, of course, was ridiculous. He must have been named after the ancient mythic hero, unless he had assumed the name to impress people. Once again her eyes wandered to Garion's face. The boy sat quietly in one corner of the cabin, his eyes grave, his expression serious. She thought, perhaps, that it was his seriousness that so piqued her curiosity, and kept drawing her eyes to him. Other boys she had known, nobles and the sons of nobles, had tried to be charming and witty, but Garion never tried to joke or to say clever things to try to amuse her. She was not entirely certain how to take that. Was he such a lump that he did not know how he was supposed to behave? Or perhaps he knew, but didn't care enough to make the effort. He might at least try, even if only occasionally. how could she possibly deal with him if he was going to refuse flatly to make a fool of himself for her benefit? She reminded herself sharply that she was angry with him. He had said that the Queen Selmisra had been the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, and it was far, far too early to forgive him for such an outrageous statement. She was definitely going to have to make him suffer extensively for that insulting lapse. Her fingers toyed absently with one of the curls cascading down the side of her face, her eyes boring into Gerion's face. The following morning, the ashfall that was the result of a massive volcanic eruption somewhere in Maragor had diminished sufficiently to make the deck of the ship habitable again. The jungle along the riverbank was still partially obscured in the dusty haze, but the air was clear enough to breathe, and Sinedra escaped from the sweltering cabin below deck with relief. Gerion was sitting in the sheltered spot near the bow of the ship, where he usually sat, and he was deep in conversation with Belgariad. Sinedra noted with a certain detachment that he had neglected to comb his hair that morning. She resisted her immediate impulse to go fetch a comb and brush to rectify the situation. She drifted instead, with artful dissimulation, to a place along the rail where, without seeming to, she could conveniently eavesdrop. "It's always been there," Gerion was saying to his grandfather. "It used to just talk to me. Tell me when I was being childish or stupid, that sort of thing. It seemed to be off in one corner of my mind all by itself." Belgariad nodded, scratching absently at his beard with his good hand.
"It seems to be completely separate from you," he observed. "Has this voice in your head ever actually done anything? Besides talk to you, I mean?"
Gerion's face grew thoughtful. "I don't think so. It tells me how to do things, but I think that I'm the one who has to do them. When we were at Selmisra's palace, I think it took me out of my body to go look for Aunt Paul." He frowned. "No," he corrected. "When I stop and think about it, it told me how to do it, but I was the one who actually did. Once we were out, I could feel it beside me. It's the first time we've ever been separate. I couldn't actually see it, though. It did take over for a few minutes, I think. It talked to Selmisra to smooth things over, and to hide what we had been doing."
"You have been busy since Silk and I left, haven't you?"
Gerion nodded glumly. "Most of it was pretty awful. I burned Ashrak. Did you know that?"
"Your aunt told me about it."
"He slapped her in the face," Gerion told him. "I was going to go after him with my knife for that, but the voice told me to do it a different way. I hit him with my hand and said, 'Burn.' That's all. Just burn." And he caught fire. I was going to put it out until Aunt Paul told me he was the one who killed my mother and father. Then I made the fire hotter. He begged me to put it out, but I didn't do it." He shuddered.
"I tried to warn you about that,"
Belgariad reminded him gently.
"I told you that you weren't going to like it very much after it was over."
Gerion sighed. "I should have listened. Aunt Paul says that once you've used this—" He floundered, looking for a word.
"Power?"
Belgariad suggested. "All right," Gerion assented. "She says that once you have used it, you never forget how, and you'll keep doing it again and again. I wish I had used my knife instead. Then this thing in me never would have gotten loose."
"You're wrong, you know,"
Belgariad told him quite calmly.
"You have been bursting at the seams with it for several months now. You've used it without knowing it at least half a dozen times that I know about."
Gerion stared at him incredulously.
"Remember that crazy monk just after we crossed into Tonedra? When you touched him, you made so much noise that I thought for a moment you had killed him."
"You said Aunt Paul did that."
I lied, the old man admitted casually. I do that fairly often. The whole point, though, is that you have always had this ability. It was bound to come out sooner or later. I wouldn't feel too unhappy about what you did to Hamdar. It was a little exotic, perhaps, not exactly the way I might have done it, but there was a certain justice to it, after all.
It's always going to be there, then?
Always. That's the way it is, I'm afraid.
The Princess Tenedra felt rather smug about that. Belgariad had just confirmed something she herself had told Geryon. If the boy would just stop being so stubborn, his aunt and his grandfather, and of course she herself, all of whom knew much better than he what was right and proper and good for him, could shape his life to their satisfaction with little or no difficulty.
Let's get back to this other voice of yours, Belgariad suggested. I need to know more about it. I don't want you carrying an enemy around in your mind.
It's not an enemy, Geryon insisted. It's on our side.
It might seem that way, Belgariad observed. But things are not always what they seem. I'd be a lot more comfortable if I knew just exactly what it is. I don't like surprises.
The Princess Tenedra, however, was already lost in thought. Dimly, at the back of her devious and complex little mind, an idea was beginning to take shape. An idea with very interesting possibilities. Chapter 2. The trip up to the rapids of the River of the Serpent took the better part of a week. Although it was still swelteringly hot, they had all by now grown at least partially accustomed to the climate. Princess Tenedra spent most of her time sitting on the deck with Belgariad, pointedly ignoring Geryon. She did, however, glance frequently his way to see if she could detect any signs of suffering. Since her life was entirely in the hands of these people, Tenedra felt keenly the necessity for winning them over. Belgariad would be no problem. A few winsome little girl smiles, a bit of eyelash fluttering, and a spontaneous-seeming kiss or two would wrap him neatly around one of her fingers. That particular campaign could be conducted at any time she felt it convenient. But Belgariad was a different matter. For one thing, Tenedra was awed by the lady's spectacular beauty. Belgariad was flawless. Even the white lock in the midnight of her hair was not so much a defect as it was a sort of accent, a personal trademark. Most disconcerting to the princess were Belgariad's eyes. Depending on her mood, they ranged in color from gray to a deep, deep blue, and they saw through everything. No dissimulation was possible in the face of that calm, steady gaze. Each time the princess looked into those eyes, she seemed to hear the clink of chains. She definitely had to get on Belgariad's good side.
"Lady Belgariad,"
the princess said one morning as they sat together on the deck, while the steaming gray-green jungle slid by on either bank, and the sweating sailors labored at their oars.
"Yes, dear."
Belgariad looked up from the button she was sewing on one of Geryon's tunics. She wore a pale blue dress, open at the throat in the heat.
"What is sorcery? I was always told that such things didn't exist."
It seemed like a good place to start the discussion. Belgariad smiled at her.
"Tenedran education tends to be a bit one-sided." "Is it a trick of some kind?"
Tenedra persisted.
"I mean, is it like showing people something with one hand, while you're taking something away with the other?"
She toyed with the laces on her sandals.
"No, dear. It's nothing at all like that." "Exactly how much can one do with it?"
"We have never explored that particular boundary," Belgariad replied, her needle still busy. "When something has to be done, we do it. We do not bother worrying about whether we can or cannot. Different people are better at different things, though.
It's somewhat on the order of some men being better at carpentry, while others specialize in stonemasonry. Geryon is a sorcerer, isn't he? How much can he do? Now, why had she asked that? I was wondering where this was leading, Belgariad said, giving the tiny girl a penetrating look. Tinedra blushed slightly. Don't chew on your hair, dear. You'll split the ends. Tinedra quickly removed the curl from between her teeth. We are not sure what Geryon can do yet, Belgariad continued. It is probably much too early to tell. He seems to have talent. He certainly makes enough noise whenever he does something, and that is a fair indication of his potential. He will probably be a very powerful sorcerer, then? A faint smile touched Belgariad's lips. Probably so. Always assuming that he learns to control himself? Well, Tinedra declared, we would just have to teach him to control himself then, won't we? Belgariad looked at her for a moment, and then she began to laugh. Tinedra felt a bit sheepish, but she also laughed. Geryon, who was standing not far away, turned to look at them. What's so funny? Nothing you would understand, dear, Belgariad told him. He looked offended and moved away, his back stiff and his face set. Tinedra and Belgariad laughed again. When Captain Graldic's ship finally reached the point where rocks and swiftly tumbling water made it impossible to go any farther, they moored her to a large tree on the north bank, and the party prepared to go ashore. Barak stood sweating in his mail shirt beside his friend Graldic, watching Hetar oversee the unloading of the horses. "If you happen to see my wife, give her my greetings," the red-bearded man said. Graldic nodded. "They'll probably be near Trelheim sometime during the winter." "I don't know that you need to tell her that I know about her pregnancy. She'll probably want to surprise me with my son when I get home. I wouldn't want to spoil that for her." Graldic looked a little surprised. "I thought you enjoyed spoiling things for her, Barak." "Maybe it is time that Merle and I made peace with each other. This little war of ours was amusing when we were younger, but it might not be a bad idea to put it aside now, for the sake of the children, if nothing else." Belgariad came up on deck and joined the two bearded Cheraks. "Go to Valaron," he told Captain Graldic. "Tell Anheg where we are and what we are doing. Have him get word to the others. Tell them that I absolutely forbid their going to war with the Angarax just now. Tuchek has the Orb of Raktul, and if there's a war, Tor Olgos will seal the borders of Prolmurgos. Things are going to be difficult enough for us without that to contend with." "I'll tell him," Graldic replied doubtfully. "I don't think he'll like it much, though." "He doesn't have to like it," Belgariad said bluntly. "He just has to do it." Tinedra, standing not far away, felt a little startled when she heard the shabby-looking old man issuing peremptory commands. How could he speak so to sovereign kings? And what if Geryon, as a sorcerer, should someday have a similar authority? She turned and gazed at the young man who was helping Jernik the smith calm an excited horse. He didn't look authoritative. She pursed her lips. A robe of some kind might help. Maybe some sort of a book of magic in his hands. And perhaps just the hint of a beard. She narrowed her eyes, imagining him so robed, booked, and bearded. Geryon, obviously feeling her eyes on him, looked quickly in her direction, his expression questioning. He was so ordinary. The image of this plain, unassuming boy and the finery she had concocted for him in her mind was suddenly ludicrous. Without meaning to, she laughed. Geryon flushed and stiffly turned his back on her. Since the rapids of the River of the Serpent effectively blocked all further navigation upriver, the trail leading up into the hills was quite broad, indicating that most travelers struck out overland at this point. As they rode up out of the valley in the mid-morning sunlight, they passed rather quickly out of the tangled jungle growth lining the river
and moved into a hardwood forest that was much more to Senedra's liking. At the crest of the first rise, they even encountered a breeze that seemed to brush away the sweltering heat and the stink of Niasa's festering swamps. Senedra's spirits lifted immediately. She considered the company of Prince Keldar, but he was dozing in his saddle, and Senedra was just a bit afraid of the sharp-nosed Drasnian. She recognized immediately that the cynical, wise little man could probably read her like a book, and she did not really care for that idea. Instead, she rode forward along the column to ride with Baron Mandorallan, who led the way as was his custom. Her move was prompted in part by the desire to get as far away as possible from the steaming river, but there was more to it than that. It occurred to her that this might be an excellent opportunity to question this Arendish nobleman about a matter that interested her.
"Your Highness,"
the armored knight said respectfully as she pulled her horse in beside his huge charger,
"dost thou think it prudent to place thyself in the vanguard thus?"
"Who would be so foolish as to attack the bravest knight in the world?"
she asked, with artful innocence. The Baron's expression grew melancholy, and he sighed.
"And why so great a sigh, Sir Knight?"
"It is of no moment, Your Highness."
They rode along in silence through the dappled shade where insects hummed and darted, and small, scurrying things skittered and rustled in the bushes at the side of the trail.
"Tell me," the princess said finally, "have you known Belgariad for long?"
"All my life, Your Highness."
"Is he highly regarded in Arindia?"
"Highly regarded? Holy Belgariad is the paramount man in the world. Surely thou knowest that, princess."
"I am Tonedran, Baron Mandorallan," she pointed out. "Our familiarity with sorcerers is limited. Would an Arind describe Belgariad as a man of noble birth?"
Mandorallan laughed. "Your Highness, holy Belgariad's birth is so far lost in the dim reaches of antiquity that thy question has no meaning."
Senedra frowned. She did not particularly like being laughed at.
"Is he or is he not a nobleman?"
"He is Belgariad,"
Mandorallan replied, as if that explained everything.
"There are hundreds of barons, earls by the score, lords without number. But there is only one Belgariad. All men give way to him."
She beamed at him.
"And what about Lady Belgara?"
Mandorallan blinked, and Senedra saw that she was going too fast for him.
"The Lady Belgara is revered above all women."
He said it with a puzzled note.
"Highness, could I but know the direction of your inquiry, I might provide thee with a more satisfactory response."
She laughed.
"My dear Baron, it is nothing important or serious, just curiosity, and a way to pass the time as we ride."
Dernick the smith came forward at a trot just then, his sorrel horse's hoofbeats thudding on the packed earth of the trail.
"Mistress Bull wants you to wait for a bit."
"Is anything wrong?"
"No, it's just that there's a bush not far from the trail that she recognized. Wants to harvest some of the leaves. I think they have certain medicinal uses. She says it's very rare and only found in this part of Nirsa."
The smith's plain, honest face was respectful, as it always was when he spoke of Belgara. Senedra had certain private suspicions about Dernick's feelings, but she kept them to herself.
"Oh,"
he went on,
"she said to warn you about the bush. Might be others round. It's about a foot tall, has a very shiny green leaf and a little purple flower. Deadly poisonous, even to touch." "We will not stray from the trail, good man," Mandorallan assured him, "but will abide here against the lady's permission to proceed."
Dernick nodded and rode on back down the trail. Senedra and Mandorallan pulled their horses into the shade of a broad tree and sat waiting.
"How do the Arins regard Garion?"
Senedra asked suddenly.
"Garion, he is a good lad," Mandorallan replied, somewhat confused.
"Oh, but hardly noble,"
she prompted him.
Highness, Mandarallan told her delicately, lion education, I fear, has led thee astray. Garion is of the line of Belgariad and Polgara. Though he hath no rank such as thou and I both have, his blood is of the noblest in the world. I would give precedence to him without question, should he ask it of me, which he would not, being a modest lad. During our sojourn at the court of King Corodulan at Vomimbre, a young countess pursued him most fervently, thinking to gain status and prestige by marriage to him.
Really?
Senedra asked, with a hard little edge coming into her voice. She sought betrothal, and trapped him often with blatant invitation to dalliance and sweet conversation.
A beautiful countess?
Oh, one of the great beauties of the kingdom.
I see.
Senedra's voice was now like ice. Have I given offense, Highness?
It's not important.
Mandarallan sighed again.
What is it now?
I perceive that my faults are many.
I thought you were supposed to be the perfect man.
She regretted that instantly. Nay, Highness, I am marred beyond thy conception.
Oh, a bit undiplomatic, perhaps, but that's no great in an errand.
But cowardice is, Highness. She laughed at the notion.
Cowardice? You?
I have found that fault in myself, he admitted.
Don't be ridiculous. If anything, your fault lies in the other direction.
It is difficult to believe, I know, but I assure thee with great shame that I have felt the grip of fear upon my heart. Senedra was baffled by the knight's mournful confession. She was struggling to find some proper reply when a great crashing rush burst out of the undergrowth a few yards away. With a sudden start of panic, her horse wheeled and bolted. She caught only the briefest glimpse of something large and tawny leaping out of the bushes at her, large, tawny, and with a great gaping mouth. She tried desperately to cling to her saddle with one hand and to control her terrified horse with the other, but its frantic flight took him under a low branch, and she was swept off of its back to land unceremoniously in the middle of the trail. She rolled to her hands and knees, and then froze as she faced the beast that had so clumsily burst forth from concealment. She saw at once that the lion was not very old. She noted that, though his body was fully developed, he had only a half-grown mane. Clearly, he was an adolescent, unskilled at hunting. He roared with frustration as he watched the fleeing horse disappear back down the trail, and his tail lashed. The princess felt a momentary touch of amusement. He was so young, so awkward. Then her amusement was replaced by irritation with this clumsy young beast who had caused her humiliating unhorsing. She rose to her feet, brushed off her knees, and looked at him sternly. "Shoo!" she said, with an insistent flip of her hand. She was, after all, a princess, and he was only a lion, a very young and foolish lion. The yellow eyes fell on her then and narrowed slightly. The lashing tail grew suddenly quite still. The young lion's eyes widened with a sort of dreadful intensity, and he crouched, his belly going low to the ground. His upper lip lifted to reveal his very long white teeth. He took one slow step toward her, his great paw touching down softly. "Don't you dare," she told him indignantly. "Remain quite still, Highness," Mandarallan warned her in a deathly quiet voice. From the corner of her eye, she saw him slide out of the saddle. The lion's eyes flickered toward him with annoyance. Carefully, one step at a time, Mandarallan crossed the intervening space until he had placed his armored body between the lion and the princess. The lion watched him warily, not seeming to realize what he was doing until it was too late. Then, cheated of another meal, the cat's eyes went flat with rage. Mandarallan drew his sword very carefully,
Then, to Senedra's amazement, he passed it back, hilt first, to her.
"So that thou shalt have means of defending thyself, should I fail to withstand him," the knight explained.
Doubtfully, Senedra took hold of the huge hilt with both hands. When Mandoralin released his grip on the blade, however, the point dropped immediately to the ground. Try though she might, Senedra could not even lift the huge sword. Snarling, the lion crouched even lower. His tail lashed furiously for a moment, then stiffened out behind him.
"Mandoralin, look out!"
Senedra screamed, still struggling with the sword. The lion leaped. Mandoralin flung his steel-cased arms wide and stepped forward to meet the cat's charge. They came together with a resounding crash, and Mandoralin locked his arms around the beast's body. The lion wrapped his huge paws around Mandoralin's shoulders, and his claws screeched deafeningly as they raked the steel of the knight's armor. His teeth grated and ground as he gnawed and bit at Mandoralin's helmeted head. Mandoralin tightened his deadly embrace. Senedra scrambled out of the way, dragging the sword behind her, and stared, wide-eyed with fright, at the dreadful struggle. The lion's clawing became more desperate and great. Deep scratches appeared on Mandoralin's armor as the membrate's arms tightened inexorably. The roars became yowls of pain, and the lion struggled now not to fight or kill, but to escape. He wriggled and thrashed and tried to bite. His hind paws came up to rake furiously on Mandoralin's armored trunk. His yowls grew more shrill, more filled with panic. With a superhuman effort, Mandoralin jerked his arms together. Senedra heard the cracking of bones with a sickening clarity, and an enormous fountain of blood erupted from the cat's mouth. The young lion's body quivered, and his head dropped. Mandoralin unclenched his locked hands, and the dead beast slid limply from his grasp to the ground at his feet. Stunned, the princess stared at the stupendous man in blood-smeared, clawed armor standing before her. She had just witnessed the impossible. Mandoralin had killed a lion with no weapon but his mighty arms. All for her. Without knowing why, she found herself crowing with delight.
"Mandoralin!"
She fair sang his name.
"You are my knight!"
Still panting from his efforts, Mandoralin pushed up his visor. His blue eyes were wide, as if her words had struck him with a stunning impact. Then he sank to his knees before her.
"Your Highness,"
he said in a choked voice,
"I have pledged to thee, here upon the body of this beast, to be thy true and faithful knight, for so long as I have breath."
Deep inside her, Senedra felt a profound sort of click, the sound of two things, fated from time's beginning to come together, finally meeting. Something, she did not know exactly what, but something very important had happened there in that sun-dappled glade. And then Barak, huge and imposing, came galloping up the trail with Hetar at his side, and the others not far behind.
"What happened?"
the big Cherok demanded, swinging down from his horse. Senedra waited until they had all reined in to make her announcement.
"The lion there attacked me,"
she said, trying to make it sound like an everyday occurrence.
"Mandoralin killed him with his bare hands."
"I was in fact wearing these, Highness,"
the still kneeling knight reminded her, holding up his gauntleted fists.
"He was the bravest thing I have ever seen in my life,"
Senedra swept on.
"Why are you down on your knees?" Barak asked Mandoralin. "Are you hurt?"
"I have just made Sir Mandoralin my very own knight,"
Senedra declared.
"and as is quite proper, he knelt to receive that honor from my hands."
From the corner of her eye, she saw Geryon in the act of sliding down from his horse. He was scowling like a thundercloud. Silently, Senedra exulted. Leaning forward, then, she placed a sisterly kiss on Mandoralin's brow.
"Rise, Sir Knight,"
she commanded, and Mandoralin creaked to his feet. Senedra was enormously pleased with herself. The remainder of the day passed without incident. They crossed a low range of hills and came down into a little valley as the sun settled slowly into a cloud bank off to the west. The valley was watered by a small stream, sparkling and cold, and they stopped there to set up their night's encampment. Mandorallan, in his new role as Knight Protector, was suitably attentive, and Tynedra accepted his service graciously, casting occasional covert glances at Garion to be certain that he was noticing everything. Somewhat later, when Mandorallan had gone to see to his horse and Garion had stomped off to sulk, she sat demurely on a moss-covered log, congratulating herself on the day's accomplishments.
"Aye, you're playing a cruel game, Princess," Dernick told her bluntly from the spot a few feet away where he was building a fire.
Tynedra was startled. So far as she could remember, Dernick had never spoken directly to her since she had joined the party. The smith was obviously uncomfortable in the presence of royalty, and indeed seemed actually to avoid her. Now, however, he looked straight into her face, and his tone was reproving.
"I don't know what you're talking about."
"Oh, I think you do." His plain, honest face was serious, and his gaze was steady. Tynedra lowered her eyes and flushed slowly.
"I've seen village girls play this same game. Nothing good ever comes of it."
"I'm not trying to hurt anybody, Dernick. There isn't really anything of that sort between Mandorallan and me. We both know that."
"Ah, but Garion doesn't."
Tynedra was amazed.
"Garion?
"Isn't that what it's all about, then?"
Well, of course not,"
she objected indignantly. Dernick's look was profoundly skeptical.
"Such a thing never entered my mind,"
Tynedra rushed on.
It's absolutely absurd."
"Really?" Tynedra's bold front collapsed.
"He is so stubborn," she complained. "He just won't do anything the way he's supposed to."
"He's an honest boy. Whatever else he is or might become, he's still the plain, simple boy he was at Faldor's farm. He doesn't know the rules of the gentry. He won't lie to you or flatter you, or say things he doesn't really feel. I think something very important's going to happen to him before very long. Oh, I don't know what. But I do know it's going to take all his strength and courage. Don't weaken him with all of this childishness."
"Oh, Dernick,"
she said with a great sigh.
"what am I going to do?"
Be honest. Say only what's on your heart. Now don't say one thing and mean another. That won't work with him."
"I know. That's what makes it all so difficult. He was raised one way and I was raised another. We're never going to get along."
She sighed again. Dernick smiled. A gentle, almost whimsical smile.
"Oh, no, it's not all that bad, Princess. You'll fight a great deal at first. You're almost as stubborn as he is, you know. You were born in different parts of the world, but you're not really all that different inside. Oh, you shout at each other and shake your fingers in each other's faces, but in time that'll pass. You won't even remember what you were shouting about. Some of the best marriages I know of started that way."
"Marriage?"
"Oh, that's what you've got in mind, isn't it?"
She stared at him incredulously. Then she suddenly laughed.
"Dear, dear Dernick, you don't understand at all, do you?"
"Oh, I understand what I see, and what I see is a young girl doing everything she possibly can to catch a young man."
Tynedra sighed.
"That is completely out of the question, you know. Even if I felt that way, which of course I don't."
"Naturally not."
He looked slightly amused.
"Dear Dernick," she said again, "I cannot even allow myself such thoughts. Well, you forget who I am."
"Well, that's not very likely. You're usually very careful to keep the fact firmly in front of everybody."
"Well, don't you know what it means?"
He looked a bit perplexed.
"I don't quite follow."
"I'm an imperial princess, the jewel of the empire, and I belong to the empire. I'll have absolutely no voice in the decision about who I am going to marry. That decision will be made by my father and the council of advisers. My husband will be rich and powerful, probably much older than I am, and my marriage to him will be to the advantage of the empire and the house of Borun. I probably won't even be consulted in the matter."
Dernick looked stunned. "Well, that's outrageous."
"Not really. My family has the right to protect its interests, and I'm an extremely valuable asset to the Boruns."
She sighed again, a forlorn little sigh.
"Oh, it might be nice, though, to be able to choose for myself. I mean, if I could, I might even look at Garion the way you seem to think I have been looking. Even though he's absolutely impossible. The way things are, though, all he can ever be is a friend."
"I didn't know," he apologized, his plain, practical face melancholy.
"Oh, don't take it so seriously, Dernick," she said lightly. "I have always known that this was the way things have to be."
A large glistening tear, however, welled into the corner of her eye, and Dernick awkwardly put his work-worn hand on her arm to comfort her. Without knowing why, she threw her arms around his neck, buried her face in his chest, and sobbed. "Oh, now, there," he said, clumsily patting her shaking shoulder. There. Chapter 3. Garion did not sleep well that night. Although he was young and inexperienced, he was not stupid, and Princess Tenedra had been fairly obvious. Over the months since she had joined them, he had seen her attitude toward him change until they had shared a rather specialized kind of friendship. He liked her. She liked him. Everything had been fine up to that point. Why couldn't she just leave it alone? Garion surmised that it probably had something to do with the inner workings of the female mind. As soon as a friendship passed a certain point, some obscure and secret boundary, a woman quite automatically became overwhelmed by a raging compulsion to complicate things. He was almost certain that her transparent little game with Mandoralan had been aimed at him, and he wondered if it might not be a good idea to warn the knight to spare him more heartbreak in the future. Tenedra's toying with the great man's affections was little more than the senseless cruelty of a spoiled child. Mandoralan must be warned. His horrendish thick-headedness might easily cause him to overlook the obvious. And yet, Mandoralan had killed the lion for her. Such stupendous bravery could quite easily have overwhelmed the flighty little princess. What if her admiration and gratitude had pushed her over the line into infatuation? That possibility, coming to Garion as it did in those darkest hours just before dawn, banished all possibility of further sleep. He arose the next morning sandy-eyed and surly, and with a terrible worry gnawing at him. As they rode out through the blue-tinged shadows of early morning, with the slanting rays of the newly risen sun gleaming on the tree-tops above them, Garion fell in beside his grandfather, seeking the comfort of the old man's companionship. It was not only that, however. Tenedra was riding demurely with Aunt Paul just ahead, and Garion felt very strongly that he should keep an eye on her. Mr. Wolf rode in silence, looking cross and irritable, and he frequently dug his fingers under the splint on his left arm. "Leave it alone, father," Aunt Paul told him without turning around. "It itches." "That's because it's healing. Now just leave it alone." He grumbled about that under his breath. "Which route are you planning to take to the Vale?"
"We'll go around by way of Tall Rain."
"The season is moving on, father. If we take too long," she reminded him, "we will run into bad weather in the mountains."
"I know that, Paul. Would you rather cut straight across Maragor?"
"Don't be absurd." "Is Maragor really all that dangerous?" Garion asked. Princess Tenedra turned in her saddle and gave him a withering look. "Don't you know anything?" she asked him with towering superiority.
Geryon drew himself up, a dozen suitable responses to that coming to mind almost at once. Mr. Wolf shook his head warningly.
Just let it pass. It's much too early to start in on that just now.
Geryon clenched his teeth together. They rode for an hour or more through the cool morning, and Geryon gradually felt his temper improving. Then Hettar rode up to speak with Mr. Wolf.
There are some riders coming, he reported. How many? 12 or more, coming in from the west. They could be Tonedrans.
I'll see, Aunt Paul murmured. She lifted her face and closed her eyes for a moment. No, not Tonedrans. Maragors.
Hettar's eyes went flat. Do we fight? He asked with a dreadful kind of eagerness, his hand going to his saber. No, Wolf replied curtly. We hide.
There aren't really that many of them.
Never mind, Hettar, Wolf told him. Selk, he called ahead. There are some Maragors coming toward us from the west. Warn the others. Find us all a place to hide.
Silk nodded curtly and galloped forward.
Are there any Grolums with them? The old man asked Aunt Paul.
I don't think so, she answered, with a small frown. One of them has a strange mind, but he doesn't seem to be a Grolum. Silk rode back quickly. There's a thicket off to the right. It is big enough to hide in.
Let's go, then.
The thicket was 50 yards back among the larger trees. It appeared to be a patch of dense brush surrounding a small hollow. The ground in the hollow was marshy, and there was a spring at its center. Silk had swung down from his horse and was hacking a thick bush off close to the ground with his short sword. Take cover in here. I'll go back and brush out our tracks. He picked up the bush and wormed his way out of the thicket.
Be sure that the horses do not make any noise,
Wolf told Hettar. Hettar nodded, but his eyes showed his disappointment. Geryon dropped to his knees and wormed his way through the thick brush until he reached the edge of the thicket. Then he sank down on the leaves, covering the ground to peer out between the gnarled, stumpy trunks. Silk, walking backward and swinging his bush, was sweeping leaves and twigs from the forest floor over the tracks they had made from the trail to the thicket. He was moving quickly, but was careful to obliterate their trail completely. From behind him, Geryon heard a faint snap and a rustle in the leaves, and Sinedra crawled up and sank to the ground at his side. You shouldn't be this close to the edge of the brush, he told her in a low voice. Neither should you, she retorted. He let it pass. The princess had a warm, flower-like smell. For some reason it made Geryon very nervous. How far away do you think they are? Well, how would I know? You are a sorcerer, aren't you? I'm not that good at it. Silk finished brushing away the tracks and stood for a moment studying the ground as he looked for any trace of their passage that he might have missed. Then he burrowed his way into the thicket and crouched down a few yards from Geryon and Sinedra. Lord Hettar wanted to fight them, Sinedra whispered to Geryon. Hettar always wants to fight when he sees Maragors. Why? The Maragors killed his parents when he was very young. He had to watch while they did it. She gasped. How awful! If you children don't mind, Silk said sarcastically, I'm trying to listen for horses. Somewhere beyond the trail they had just left, Geryon heard the thudding sound of horses' hooves moving at a trot. He sank down deeper into the leaves and watched, scarcely breathing. When the Maragors appeared, there were about 15 of them, male-shirted and with the scarred cheeks of their race. Their leader, however, was a man in a patched and dirty tunic with coarse black hair. He was unshaven, and one of his eyes was out of line with its fellow. Geryon knew him. Silk drew in a sharp breath with an audible hiss. Brill, he muttered. Who is Brill? Sinedra whispered to Geryon. I'll tell you later,
he whispered back. "Shush now."
"Don't you shush me,"
she flared. A stern look from Silk silenced them both. Brill was talking sharply to the Murgos, gesturing with short, jerky movements. Then he raised his hands with his fingers wide spread and stabbed them forward to emphasize what he was saying. The Murgos all nodded, their faces expressionless, and spread out along the trail, facing the woods and the thicket where Geryon and the others were hiding. Brill moved farther up the trail.
"Keep your eyes open,"
he shouted to them.
"Let's go."
The Murgos started to move forward at a walk, their eyes searching. Two of them rode past the thicket so close that Geryon could smell the sweat on their horses' flanks.
"I am getting tired of that man,"
one of them remarked to the other.
"I would not let it show,"
the second one advised.
"I can take orders as well as any man,"
the first one said.
"But that one is beginning to irritate me. I think that he would look better with a knife between his shoulder blades. I don't think he'd like that much, and it might be a little hard to manage. I could wait until he was asleep. I have never seen him sleep. Everybody sleeps, sooner or later." "It's up to you," the second replied with a shrug. "But I would not try anything so rash, unless you have given up the idea of ever seeing Rakhaga again."
The two of them moved on out of earshot. Silk crouched, gnawing nervously at a fingernail. His eyes had narrowed to slits, and his sharp little face was intent. Then he began to swear under his breath.
"What's wrong, Silk?"
Geryon whispered to him. "I've made a mistake," Silk answered irritably. "Let's go back to the others." He turned and crawled through the bushes toward the spring at the center of the thicket. Mr. Wolf was seated on a log, scratching absently at his splinted arm.
"Well?"
he asked, looking up. 15 Murgos, Silk replied shortly. "And an old friend."
"It was Brill,"
Geryon reported.
"He seemed to be in charge."
"Brill?"
The old man's eyes widened with surprise.
"He was giving orders, and the Murgos were following them. Oh, they didn't like it much, but they were doing what he told them to do. They seemed to be afraid of him. I think Brill is something more than an ordinary hireling."
"Where is Rakhaga?"
Tinedra asked. Wolf looked at her sharply.
"We heard two of them talking. They said they were from Rakhaga. I thought I knew the names of all of the cities in Solmurgos, but I've never heard of that one."
"Sure, they said Rakhaga?"
Wolf asked her, his eyes intent.
"I heard them too," Geryon told him. "That was the name they used. Rakhaga."
Mr. Wolf stood up, his eyes suddenly grim.
"We're going to have to hurry, then. Tar Urgas is preparing for war."
"How do you know that?"
Beric asked him.
"Rakhaga's 1,000 leagues south of Rakgoska, and the southern Murgos are never brought up into this part of the world, unless the Murgo king is on the verge of going to war with someone."
"Let them come,"
Beric said with a bleak smile.
"If it is all the same to you, I'd like to get our business attended to first. I have got to go to Raxol, and I'd prefer not to have to wade through whole armies of Murgos to get there."
The old man shook his head angrily.
"What is Tar Urgas thinking of? It's not time yet."
Beric shrugged.
"One time is as good as another."
"Not for this war. Too many things have to happen first. Can't Tuchik keep a leash on that maniac?"
"Unpredictability is part of Tar Urgas' unique charm," Silk observed sardonically. "He doesn't know himself what he's going to do from one day to the next."
"Knowest thou the king of the Murgos?" Mandaralan inquired.
We've met," Silk replied. "We are not fond of each other."
"Brill and his Mergo should be gone by now, Mr. Wolf said. Let's move on. We've got a long way to go, and time is starting to catch up with us.
He moved quickly toward his horse. Shortly before sundown, they went through a high pass lying in a notch between two mountains, and stopped for the night in a little glen a few miles down on the far side.
Keep the fire down as much as you can, Dernick, Mr. Wolf warned the smith. Southern Mergos have sharp eyes, and they can see the light from a fire from miles away. I'd rather not have company in the middle of the night.
Dernick nodded soberly, and dug his fire-pit somewhat deeper than usual. Mandaralan was attentive to the Princess Senedra as they set up for the night, and Geryon watched sourly. Though he had violently objected each time Aunt Paul had insisted that he serve as Senedra's personal attendant, now that the tiny girl had her knight to fetch and carry for her, Geryon felt somehow that his rightful position had in some way been usurped.
We're going to have to pick up our pace,
Wolf told them, after they had finished a meal of bacon, bread, and cheese.
We've got to get through these mountains before the first storms hit, and we are going to have to try to stay ahead of Brill and his Mergos.
He scraped a space clear on the ground in front of him with a foot, picked up a stick, and began sketching a map in the dirt.
We are here, he pointed. Maragor's directly ahead of us. We will soak it to the west, go through Tolrain, and then strike northeast toward the Vale. Might it not be shorter to cross Maragor? Mandaralan suggested, pointing at the crude map.
Perhaps, the old man replied.
But we won't do that unless we have to. Maragor's haunted, and it is best to avoid it if possible. We are not children to be frightened of insubstantial shades, Mandaralan declared somewhat stiffly.
No one is doubting your courage, Mandaralan, but the spirit of Mara wails in Maragor, Aunt Paul told him. It is better not to offend him.
How far is it to this Vale of Alder? Dernick asked. 250 leagues, Wolf answered. We will be a month or more in the mountains, even under the best of conditions. Now, we had better all get some sleep. Tomorrow is likely to be a very hard day.
Chapter 4. When they rose the next morning, as the first pale hint of light was appearing on the eastern horizon, there was a touch of silvery frost on the ground, and a thin scum of ice around the edges of the spring at the bottom of the glen. Senedra, who had gone to the spring to wash her face, lifted a thin shard from the water and stared at it.
"Oh, it's much colder up in these mountains,"
Geryon told her as he belted on his sword.
"I am aware of that,"
she replied loftily.
"Forget it,"
he said shortly, and stomped away, muttering. They rode down out of the mountains in the bright morning sunlight, moving at a steady trot. As they rounded a shoulder of outcropping rock, they saw the broad basin that had once been Maragor, the district of the Marags, stretching out below them. The meadows were a dusty autumn green, and the streams and lakes sparkled in the sun. A tumbled ruin, looking tiny in the distance, gleamed far out on the plain. Princess Senedra, Geryon noticed, kept her eyes averted, refusing even to look. Not far down the slope below them, a cluster of crude huts and lopsided tents lay in a steep gully where a frothy creek had cut down through the rocks and gravel. Dirt streets and paths wandered crookedly up and down the sides of the gully, and a dozen or so ragged-looking men were hacking somewhat dispiritedly at the creek bank with picks and mattocks, turning the water below the shabby settlement a muddy yellow-brown.
"There's a town?" Dernick questioned. "Out here?" "Not exactly a town," Wolf replied. "The men in those settlements sift gravel and dig up the stream banks, looking for gold."
"Is there gold here?" Silk asked quickly, his eyes bright.
A little," Wolf said. "Probably not enough to make it worth anyone's time to look for it."
"Well, why do they bother, then?"
Wolf shrugged. "Who knows?"
Munderellen and Barak took the lead, and they moved down the rocky trail toward the settlement. As they approached, 2 men came out of one of the huts with rusty swords in their hands. One, a thin, unshaven man with a high forehead, wore a greasy Tolnedran jerkin. The other, much taller and bulkier, was dressed in the ragged tunic of an Arendish serf. "That is fair enough," the Tolnedran shouted. "We don't like armed men coming in here until we know what their business is."
Barak advised him, "You're blocking the trail, friend. You might find that unhealthy."
"One shout from me will bring 50 armed men," the Tolnedran warned.
"Don't be an idiot, Reldor," the big Arend told him. "That one with all the steel on him is a membrate knight. There aren't enough men on the whole mountain to stop him if he decides to go here."
He looked warily at Mandurallan.
"What are your intentions, Sir Knight?" he asked respectfully.
"We are but following the trail," Mandurallan replied. "We have no interest in thy community."
The Arend grunted. "That's good enough for me. Let them pass, Raldo."
He slid his sword back under his rope belt.
"What if he is lying?"
Raldo retorted.
"What if they are here to steal our gold?"
"What gold, you jackass?" the Arend demanded with contempt. "There isn't enough gold in this whole camp to fill a thimble, and membrate knights don't lie. If you want to fight with him, go ahead. After it's over, we will scoop up what's left of you and dump you in a hole someplace."
"You have got a bad mouth, Bereg," Raldo observed darkly.
"And what do you plan to do about it?"
The Tolnedran glared at the larger man and then turned and walked away, muttering curses.
Bereg laughed harshly, then turned back to Mandurallan. "Come ahead, Sir Knight. Raldo's all mouth. You don't have to worry about him."
Mandurallan moved forward at a walk. "Thou art a long way from home, my friend."
Bereg shrugged. "There wasn't anything on Orindia to keep me. And I had a misunderstanding with my lord over a pig. When he started talking about hanging, I thought I'd like to try my luck in a different country."
"Seems like a sensible decision," Barak laughed.
Bereg winked at him. "The trail goes right on down to the creek, then up the other side behind those shacks. The men over there are Nadraks, but the only one who might give you any trouble is Tylek. He got drunk last night, though, so he's probably still sleeping it off."
A vacant-eyed man in Sendarian clothing shambled out of one of the tents. Suddenly he lifted his face and howled like a dog. Bereg picked up a rock and shied it at him. The Sendar dodged the rock and ran yelping behind one of the shacks.
"One of these days, I'm going to do him a favor and stick a knife in him," Bereg remarked sourly. "You know he bathes at the moon all night long."
"What is his problem?"
Bereg asked.
Bereg shrugged.
"Crazy. He thought he could make a dash into Maragor and pick up some gold before the ghosts caught him. He was wrong."
"What did they do to him?" Dernick asked, his eyes wide.
"Nobody knows. Every so often somebody gets drunk or greedy and thinks he can get away with it. It wouldn't do you any good. Even if the ghost didn't catch you, anybody coming out is stripped immediately by his friends. Nobody gets to keep any gold he brings out, so why bother?"
"Oh, you've got such a charming society here," Silk observed wryly.
Bereg laughed. "It suits me. Better than decorating a tree in my lord's apple orchard back in Orindia."
He scratched absently at his armpit.
"I guess I had better go do some digging. Good luck."
He turned and started toward one of the tents.
"Let's move along,"
Wolf said quietly.
"These places tend to get rowdy as the days wear on."
"You seem to know quite a bit about them, Father," Aunt Paul noticed.
"They're good places to hide," he replied. "Nobody asks any questions.
I have needed to hide a time or two in my life.
I wonder why. They started along the dusty street between the slapped-together shacks and patched tents, moving down toward the rolling creek. "Wait!" somebody called from behind. A scruffy-looking Dresnian was running after them, waving a small leather pouch. He caught up with them, puffing. "Why, didn't you wait?" he demanded. "And what do you want?" Silk asked him. "I will give you 50 pennyweight of fine gold for the girl," the Dresnian panted, waving his leather sack again. Mandaralan's face went black, and his hand moved toward his sword hilt. "Why don't you let me deal with this, Mandaralan?" Silk suggested mildly, swinging down from his saddle. Tenedra's expression had first registered shock, then outrage. She appeared almost on the verge of explosion before Geryon reached her and put his hand on her arm. "Watch," he told her softly. "How dare—" "Hush. Just watch. Silk's going to take care of it." "That's a pretty paltry offer," Silk said, his fingers flicking idly. "She's still young," the other Dresnian signaled back. "She obviously hasn't had much training yet. Which of you owns her?" "We'll get to that in a moment," Silk replied. "Surely you can make a better offer than that." "It's all I've got," the scruffy man answered plaintively, waving his fingers. "And I don't want to go into partnership with any of the brigands in this place. I'd never get to see any of the profits." Silk shook his head. "I'm sorry. It's out of the question," he refused. "I'm sure you can see our position." Tenedra was making strangled noises. "Be quiet," Geryon snapped. "This isn't what it seems to be." "What about the older one?" the scruffy man suggested, sounding desperate. "Surely 50 pennyweight's a good price for her." Without warning, Silk's fist lashed out and the scruffy Dresnian reeled back from the apparent blow. His hand flew to his mouth and he began to spew curses. "Run him off, Mandaralan," Silk said quite casually. The grim-faced knight drew his broadsword and moved his war-horse deliberately at the swearing Dresnian. After one startled yelp, the man turned and fled.
"What did he say?"
Wolf asked Silk.
"You were standing in front of him. I couldn't see."
"The whole region is alive with Murgos," Silk replied, climbing back on his horse. "Charon says that 12 parties of them have been through here in the last week." "You knew that animal?" Tenedra demanded. "Charon? Oh, of course. We went to school together."
"Dresnians like to keep an eye on things, Princess," Wolf told her. "King Rodar has agents everywhere."
That awful man is an agent of King Rodar?"
Tenedra asked incredulously. Silk nodded. "Actually, Charon's a Margrave. He has exquisite manners under normal circumstances. He asked me to convey his compliments." Tenedra looked baffled. "Dresnians talk to each other with their fingers," Geryon explained. "I thought everybody knew that." Tenedra's eyes narrowed at him. "What Charon actually said was, 'Tell the red-haired wench that I apologize for the insult,'" Geryon informed her smugly. "He needed to talk to Silk, and he had to have an excuse."
"Wench?"
"His word, not mine," Geryon replied quickly.
"You know this sign language?"
"Naturally." "That will do, Geryon," Aunt Paul said firmly. "Charon recommends that we get out of here immediately," Silk told Mr. Wolf. "He says that the Murgos are looking for somebody. Us, probably." From the far side of the camp there were sudden angry voices. Several dozen Nedraks boiled out of their shanties to confront a group of Maragor horsemen who had just ridden up out of a deep gully. At the forefront of the Nedraks hulked a huge, fat man who looked more animal than human. In his right hand he carried a brutal-looking steel mace.
"Kadoch,"
he bellowed.
"I told you I'd kill you next time you came here."
The man who stepped out from among the Maragor horses to face the hulking Nedrak was Brill.
"You've told me a lot of things, Tarlak,"
he shouted back.
"This time, you get what's coming to you, Cordach,"
Turlock roared, striding forward and swinging his mace.
"Stay back," Brill warned, stepping away from the horses. "I don't have time for this right now." "You don't have time left at all, Cordach, for anything."
Barak was grinning broadly.
"Would anyone like to take this opportunity to say goodbye to our friend over there? I think he's about to leave on a very long journey."
But Brill's right hand had dipped suddenly inside his tunic. With a flickering movement, he whipped out a peculiar-looking triangular steel object about 6 inches across. Then, in the same movement, he flipped it, spinning and whistling, directly at Tarlok. The flat steel triangle sailed, flashing in the sun as it spun, and it disappeared with a sickening sound of shearing bone into the hulking Nedrak chest. Silk hissed with amazement. Tarlok stared stupidly at Brill, his mouth agape and his left hand going to the spurting hole in his chest. Then his mace slid out of his right hand, his knees buckled, and he fell heavily forward.
"Let's get out of here," Mr. Wolf barked. "Down the creek! Go!"
They plowed into the rocky stream bed at a plunging gallop, and the muddy water sprayed out from under their horses' hooves. After several hundred yards, they turned sharply to scramble up a steep gravel bank.
"That way,"
Barak shouted, pointing toward more level ground. Geryon did not have time to think, only to cling to his horse and try to keep up with the others. Faintly, far behind, he could hear shouts. They rode behind a low hill and reined in for a moment at Wolf's signal.
"Hitar,"
the old man said.
"See if they're coming."
Hitar wheeled his horse and loped up to a stand of trees on the brow of the hill. Silk was muttering curses, his face livid.
"What's your problem now?"
Barak demanded. Silk kept on swearing.
"What's got him so worked up?"
Barak asked Mr. Wolf.
"Our friend has just had a nasty shock," the old man answered. "He misjudged someone. So did I. That weapon Brill used on the big Nedrak is called an adder sting."
Barak shrugged.
"It looked like just an odd-shaped throwing knife to me."
"There's a bit more to it than that. It's as sharp as a razor on all 3 sides. The points are usually dipped in poison. It is the special weapon of the Dagashi. That's what has got Silk so upset."
"I should have known," Silk berated himself. "Brill's been a little too good all along to just be an ordinary Sendarian footpad."
"Do you know what they're talking about, Belgariad?"
"The Dagashi are a secret society in Murgos. They are trained killers, assassins. They answer only to Tuchek and their own elders. Tuchek's been using them for centuries to eliminate people who get in his way. They are very efficient."
"I've never been that curious about the peculiarities of Murgo culture. If they want to creep around and kill each other, so much the better."
He glanced up the hill quickly to find out if Hitar had seen anything behind them.
"That thing Brill used might be an interesting toy, but it is no match for armor and a good sword."
"Don't be so provincial, Barak," Silk said, beginning to regain his composure. "A well-thrown adder sting can cut right through a mail shirt. If you know how, you can even sail it around corners. Not only that, a Dagashi can kill you with his hands and feet, whether you are wearing armor or not." He frowned. "You know, Belgariad," he mused, "we might have been making a mistake all along. We assumed that Asherak was using Brill, but it might have been the other way around. Brill has to be good, or Ktuchik would not have sent him to the west to keep an eye on us." He smiled then, a chillingly bleak little smile. I wonder just how good he is." He flexed his fingers. "I have met a few Dagashi, but never one of their best. That might be very interesting."
"Let's not get sidetracked,"
Wolf told him. The old man's face was grim. He looked at Aunt Paul, and something seemed to pass between them. "You're not serious."
"I don't think we've got much choice, Paul. There are Murgos all around us. Too many, and too close. I don't have any room to move. They have got us pinned right up against the southern edge of Maragor. Sooner or later we are going to get pushed out into the plain anyway. At least if we make the decision ourselves, we will be able to take some precautions."
"I don't like it, Father."
"I don't much care for it myself. But we have got to shake off all of these Murgos, or we will never make it to the Vale before winter sets in."
Hettar rode back down the hill.
"They are coming,"
he reported quietly.
"And there's another group of them circling in from the west to cut us off."
Wolf drew in a deep breath.
"I think that pretty well decides it, Paul. Let's go."
As they passed into the belt of trees dotting the last low line of hills bordering the plain, Geryon glanced back once. A half-dozen dust clouds spotted the face of the miles-wide slope above them. Murgos were converging on them from all over the mountains. They galloped on into the trees, then thundered across the shallow draw. Barak, riding in the lead, suddenly held up his hand.
"In ahead of us."
"Murgos?" Hettar asked, his hand going to his saber.
"I don't think so. The one I saw looked more like some of those we saw back at the settlement."
Silk, his eyes very bright, pushed his way to the front. "I've got an idea. Let me talk to them." He pushed his horse into a dead run, plunging directly into what seemed to be an ambush. "Comrades," he shouted, "get ready. They are coming. And they've got the gold." Several shabby-looking men with rusty swords and axes rose from the bushes or stepped out from behind the trees to surround the little man. Silk was talking very fast, gesticulating, waving his arms, and pointing back toward the looming behind them.
"What is he doing?"
Barak asked.
"Something devious, I imagine,"
Wolf replied. The men surrounding Silk looked dubious at first, but their expressions gradually changed as he continued to talk excitedly. Finally, he turned in his saddle to look back. He jerked his arm in a broad overhead sweep. "Let's go!" he shouted. "They are with us." He spun his horse to scramble up the gravelled side of the gully.
"Don't get separated,"
Barak warned, shifting his shoulders under his mail shirt.
"I'm not sure what he's up to, but these schemes of his sometimes fall apart."
They pounded down through the grim-looking brigands and up the side of the gully on Silk's heels.
"What did you say to them?"
Barak shouted as they rode. "I told them that 15 Murgos had made a dash into Maragor and come out with 3 heavy packs of gold." Then the little man laughed. "And then I said that the men at the settlement had turned them back and that they were trying to double around this way with the gold. I told them that we'd cover the next gully if they would cover that one back there."
"These scoundrels will swarm all over Brill and his Murgos when they try to come through,"
Barak suggested. "Oh, I know," Silk laughed. "Terrible, isn't it?" They rode on at a gallop. After about half a mile, Mr. Wolf raised his arm, and they all reined in.
"This should be far enough. Now listen very carefully, all of you. These hills are alive with Murgos, so we are going to have to go into Maragor."
Princess Senedra gasped, and her face turned deathly pale. "It will be all right, dear," Aunt Paul soothed her. Wolf's face was grimly serious.
"As soon as we ride out into the plain, you're going to start hearing certain things. Don't pay any attention. Just keep riding. I'm going to be in the lead, and I want you all to watch me very closely. As soon as I raise my hand, I want you to stop. Get down off your horses immediately. Keep your eyes on the ground and do not look up no matter what you hear. There are things out there that you don't want to see. Belgariad and I are going to put you all into a kind of sleep. Don't try to fight us. Just relax. Do exactly what we tell you to do."
"Sleep?" Mandoralin protested. "What if we are attacked? How may we defend ourselves if we are asleep?"
There isn't anything alive out there to attack you, Mandarin. And it is not your body that needs to be protected. It's your mind.
What about the horses? Hetar asked.
The horses will be all right. They won't even see the ghosts.
I cannot do it,
Tenedra declared, her voice hovering on the edge of hysteria.
I cannot go into Maragor.
Yes, you can, dear, Aunt Paul told her, in that same calm, soothing voice. Stay close to me. I won't let anything happen to you. Geryon felt a sudden profound sympathy for the frightened little girl, and he drew his horse over beside hers. I'll be here too, he told her. She looked at him gratefully, but her lower lip still trembled, and her face was very pale. Mr. Wolf took a deep breath, and glanced once at the long slope behind them. The dust clouds raised by the converging Murgos were much closer now.
All right. Let's go.
He turned his horse and began to ride at an easy trot down toward the mouth of the gully and the plain stretching out before them. The sound, at first, seemed faint and very far away, almost like the murmur of wind among the branches of a forest or the soft babbling of water over stones. Then, as they rode farther out onto the plain, it grew louder, more distinct. Geryon glanced back once, almost longingly at the hills behind them. Then he pulled his horse close in beside Senedra's and locked his eyes on Mr. Wolf's back, trying to close his ears. The sound was now a chorus of moaning cries, punctuated by occasional shrieks. Behind it all, and seeming to carry and sustain all of the other sounds, was a dreadful wailing. A single voice, surely, but so vast and all-encompassing that it seemed to reverberate inside Geryon's head, erasing all thought. Mr. Wolf suddenly raised his hand, and Geryon slid out of his saddle, his eyes fixed almost desperately on the ground. Something flickered at the edge of his vision, but he refused to look. Then Aunt Paul was speaking to them, her voice calm, reassuring. I want you to form a circle. Take each other's hands. Nothing will be able to enter the circle, so you will be safe. Trembling in spite of himself, Geryon stretched out his hands. Someone took his left, he did not know who, but he instantly knew that the tiny hand that clung so desperately to his right was Senedra's. Aunt Paul stood in the center of their circle, and Geryon could feel the force of her presence there washing over all of them. Somewhere outside the circle he could feel Wolf. The old man was doing something that swirled faint surges through Geryon's veins and set off staccato bursts of the familiar roaring sound. The wailing of the dreadful single voice grew louder, more intense, and Geryon felt the first touches of panic. It was not going to work. They were all going to go mad. Hush, now, Aunt Paul's voice came to him, and he knew that she spoke inside his mind. His panic faded, and he felt a strange, peaceful lassitude. His eyes grew heavy, and the sound of the wailing grew fainter. Then, enfolded in a comforting warmth, he fell almost at once into a profound slumber. Chapter 5. Geryon was not exactly sure when it was that his mind shook off Aunt Paul's soft compulsion to sink deeper and deeper into protective unawareness. It could not have been long. Falteringly, like someone rising slowly from the depths, he swam back up out of sleep to find himself moving stiffly, even woodenly, toward the horses with the others. When he glanced at them, he saw that their faces were blank, uncomprehending. He seemed to hear Aunt Paul's whispered command to sleep, 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 but it somehow lacked the power necessary to compel him to obey. There was, to his consciousness, however, a subtle difference. Although his mind was awake, his emotions seemed not to be. He found himself looking at things with a calm, lucid detachment, uncluttered by those feelings which so often churned his thoughts into turmoil.
He knew that in all probability he should tell Aunt Paul that he was not asleep, but for some obscure reason he chose not to. Patiently, he began to sort through the notions and ideas surrounding that decision, trying to isolate the single thought which he knew must lie behind the choice not to speak. In his search, he touched that quiet corner where the other mind stayed. He could almost sense its sardonic amusement. "Well?" he said silently to it. "I see that you're finally awake," the other mind said to him. "No," Geryon corrected rather meticulously. "Actually, a part of me is asleep, I think." That was the part that kept getting in the way. "We can talk now. We have some things to discuss." "Who are you?" Geryon asked, absently following Aunt Paul's instructions to get back on his horse. "I don't actually have a name." "You're separate from me, though, aren't you? I mean, you're not just another part of me, are you?" "No," the voice replied. "We are quite separate." The horses were moving at a walk now, following Aunt Paul and Mr. Wolf across the meadow. "What do you want?" Geryon asked. "I need to make things come out the way they are supposed to. I've been doing that for a long time now." Geryon considered that. Around him the wailing grew louder, and the chorus of moans and shrieks became more distinct. Filmy, half-formed tatters of shape began to appear, floating across the grass toward the horses. "I'm going to go mad, aren't I?" he asked, somewhat regretfully. "I'm not asleep like the others are. The ghosts will drive me mad, won't they?" "Oh, I doubt it," the voice answered. "You will see some things you'd probably rather not see, but I don't think it will destroy your mind. You might even learn some things about yourself that will be useful later on." "You're very old, aren't you?" Geryon asked as the thought occurred to him. "That term doesn't have any meaning in my case." "Older than my grandfather?" "I knew him when he was a child." "It might make you feel better to know that he was even more stubborn than you are. Oh, it took me a very long time to get him started in the direction he was supposed to go." "Did you do it from inside his mind?" "Naturally." Geryon noted that his horse was walking obliviously through one of the filmy images that was taking shape in front of him. "Then he knows you, doesn't he? If you were in his mind, I mean." "He didn't know I was there." "I've always known you were there." "You're different. That's what we need to talk about." Rather suddenly, a woman's head appeared in the air directly in front of Geryon's face. The eyes were bulging. The mouth was agape in a soundless scream. The ragged, hacked-off stump of its neck streamed blood that seemed to dribble off into nowhere. "Kiss me," it croaked at him. Geryon closed his eyes as his face passed through the head. "You see," the voice pointed out conversationally, "it's not as bad as you thought it was going to be." "In what way am I different?" Geryon wanted to know. "Something needs to be done, and you are the one who's going to do it. All of the others have just been in preparation for you." "What is it exactly that I have to do?" "You'll know when the time comes. If you find out too soon, it might frighten you." The voice took on a somewhat wry note. "You are difficult enough to manage, without additional complications." "Well, why are we talking about it, then?" "You need to know why you have to do it. That might help you when the time comes." "All right," Geryon agreed. "A very long time ago, something happened that wasn't supposed to happen," the voice in his mind began. "The universe came into existence for a reason, and it was moving toward that purpose smoothly. Everything was happening the way it was supposed to happen. But then something went wrong. It wasn't really a very big thing, but it just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Or perhaps in the wrong place at the wrong time, might be a better way to put it. Anyway, it changed the direction of events. Can you understand that?
I think so,
Garion replied, frowning with the effort.
Is it like when you throw a rock at something, but it bounces off something else instead and goes where you don't want it to go? Like the time Darun threw that rock at the crow, and it hit a tree limb, and bounced off and broke Faldor's window instead.
That's exactly it, the voice congratulated him. Up to that point, there had always been only one possibility, the original one. Now there were suddenly two. Let's take it one step further. If Darun, or you, had thrown another rock very quickly and hit the first rock before it got to Faldor's window, it's possible that the first rock might have been knocked back to hit the crow instead of the window.
Maybe,
Garion conceded doubtfully.
Darun wasn't really that good at throwing rocks.
I'm much better at it than Darun, the voice told him. That's the whole reason I came into existence in the first place. In a very special way, you are the rock that I have thrown. If you hit the other rock just right, you will turn it and make it go where it was originally intended to go.
And if I don't?
Faldor's window gets broken. The figure of a naked woman with her arms chopped off and a sword thrust through her body was suddenly in front of Garion. She shrieked and moaned at him, and the stumps of her arms spurted blood directly into his face. Garion reached up to wipe off the blood, but his face was dry. Unconcerned, his horse walked through the gibbering ghost.
"We have to get things back on the right course," the voice went on.
"This certain thing you have to do is the key to the whole business. For a long time, what was supposed to happen, and what was actually happening, went off in different directions. Now they are starting to converge again. The point where they meet is the point where you will have to act. If you succeed, things will be all right again. If you don't, everything will keep going wrong, and the purpose for which the universe came into existence will fail."
"How long ago was it when this started?"
"Before the world was made, even before the gods."
"Will I succeed?"
"I don't know. I know what's supposed to happen, not what will. There is something else you need to know, too. When this mistake occurred, it set off two separate lines of possibility, and a line of possibility has a kind of purpose. To have a purpose, there has to be awareness of that purpose. To put it rather simply, that's what I am. The awareness of the original purpose of the universe."
"Only now there's another one, too, isn't there? Another awareness, I mean, one connected with the other set of possibilities."
"Why, you're even brighter than I thought."
"And wouldn't it want to keep things going the wrong way?"
"I'm afraid so. Now we come to the important part. The spot in time where all of this is going to be decided one way or another. It's getting very close, and you have got to be ready."
"Why me?"
Garion asked, brushing away a disconnected hand that appeared to be trying to clutch at his throat.
"Can't somebody else do it?"
"No," the voice told him. "That's not the way it works. The universe has been waiting for you for millions of years, more than you could even imagine. You have been hurtling toward this event since before the beginning of time. It is yours alone. You are the only one who can do what needs to be done, and it's the most important thing that will ever happen. Not just in this world, but in all of the worlds, in all of the universe. There are whole races of men on worlds so far away that the light from their suns will never reach this world, and they will cease to exist if you fail. They will never know you, nor thank you.
but their entire existence depends on you. The other line of possibility leads to absolute chaos and the ultimate destruction of the universe, but you and I lead to something else. What? If you are successful, you will live to see it happen. All right. What do I have to do? Now, I mean. You have enormous power. It has been given to you so that you can do what you have to do. But you have got to learn how to use it. Belgariad and Bulgara are trying to help you learn, so stop fighting with them about it. You've got to be ready when the time comes, and the time is much closer than you might think.
A decapitated figure stood in the trail, holding its head by the hair with its right hand. As Garion approached, the figure raised the head. The twisted mouth shrieked curses at him. After he had ridden through the ghost, Garion tried to speak to the mind within his mind again, but it seemed to be gone for the moment. They rode slowly past the tumbled stones of a ruined farmstead. Ghosts clustered thickly on the stones, beckoning and calling seductively.
A disproportionate number seem to be women,
Aunt Paul observed calmly to Mr. Wolf.
It was a peculiarity of the race, Wolf replied. 8 out of 9 births were female. It made certain adjustments necessary in the customary relationships between men and women.
I imagine you found that entertaining, she said dryly.
The Marags didn't look at things precisely the way other races do. Marriage never gained much status among them. They were quite liberal about certain things.
Oh, is that the term for it?
Try not to be so narrow-minded, Paul. The society functioned. That's what counts.
There is a bit more to it than that, Father. What about their cannibalism?
That was a mistake. Somebody misinterpreted a passage in one of their sacred texts, that's all. They did it out of a sense of religious obligation, not out of appetite. On the whole, I rather liked the Marags. They were generous, friendly, very honest with each other. They enjoyed life. If it had not been for the gold here, they'd probably have worked out their little aberration.
Garion had forgotten about the gold. As they crossed a small stream, he looked down into the sparkling water and saw the butter-yellow flecks glittering among the pebbles on the bottom. A naked ghost suddenly appeared before him.
Don't you think I'm beautiful?
She leered. Then she took hold of the sides of the great slash that ran up her abdomen, pulled it open, and spilled out her entrails in a pile on the bank of the stream. Garion gagged and clenched his teeth together.
Don't think about the gold, the voice in his mind said. The ghosts come at you through your greed. If you think about the gold, you will go mad.
They rode on, and Garion tried to push the thought of gold out of his mind. Mr. Wolf, however, continued to talk about it.
That's always been the problem with gold. It seems to attract the worst kind of people. The Tonedrons, in this case.
They were trying to stamp out cannibalism, Father. That's a custom most people find repugnant.
I wonder how serious they'd have been about it if all of that gold hadn't been lying on the bed of every stream in Maragor.
Aunt Paul averted her eyes from the ghost of a child impaled on a Tonedron spear.
And now, no one has the gold. Mara saw to that.
Yes,
Wolf agreed, lifting his face to listen to the dreadful wail that seemed to come from everywhere. He winced at a particularly shrill note in the wailing.
I wish he wouldn't scream so loud.
They passed the ruins of what appeared to have been a temple. The white stones were tumbled, and grass grew up among them. A broad tree standing nearby was festooned with hanging bodies, twisting and swinging on their ropes.
"Let us down,"
the bodies murmured.
"Let us down."
"Father," Aunt Paul said sharply, pointing at the meadow beyond the fallen temple.
"Over there. Those people are real."
A procession of robed and hooded figures moved slowly through the meadow, chanting in unison to the sound of a mournfully tolling bell, supported on a heavy pole that they carried on their shoulders.
"The monks of Mar Terran," Wolf said. "To Nedra's conscience. They aren't anything to worry about."
One of the hooded figures looked up and saw them. "Go back," he shouted. He broke away from the others and ran toward them, recoiling often from things Garion could not see. "Go back!" he cried again. "Save yourselves!" "You approach the very center of this horror. Mar Aemon lies just beyond that hill. Mara himself rages through its haunted streets." Chapter 6. The procession of monks moved on, the sound of their chanting and slowly tolling bell growing fainter as they crossed the meadow. Mr. Wolf seemed deep in thought, the fingers of his good hand stroking his beard. Finally he sighed, rather wryly.
"I suppose we might as well deal with him here and now, Paul. He'll just follow us if we don't."
"You're wasting your time, Father," Aunt Paul replied. "There is no way to reason with him. We've tried that before."
"You're probably right. But we should try, at least. Aljo would be disappointed if we didn't. Maybe when he finds out what's happening, he will come around to the point where we can at least talk to him."
A piercing wail echoed across the sunny meadow, and Mr. Wolf made a sour face.
"You'd think that he'd have shrieked himself out by now. All right, let's go to Mar Aemon."
He turned his horse toward the hill the wild-eyed monk had pointed out to them. A maimed ghost gibbered at him from the air in front of his face.
"Oh, stop that,"
he said irritably. With a startled flicker, the ghost disappeared. There had, perhaps, been a road leading over the hill at some time in the past. The faint track of it was dimly visible through the grass. But the 32 centuries which had passed since the last living foot had touched its surface had all but erased it. They wound to the top of the hill, and looked down into the ruins of Mar Aemon. Garion, still detached and unmoved, perceived and deduced things about the city he would not have otherwise noted. Though the destruction had been nearly total, the shape of the city was clearly evident. The street, for there was only one, was laid out in a spiral winding in toward a broad circular plaza in the precise center of the ruins. With a peculiar flash of insight, Garion became immediately convinced that the city had been designed by a woman. Men's minds ran to straight lines, but women thought more in terms of circles. With Aunt Paul and Mr. Wolf in the lead, and the rest following in a wooden-faced unconsciousness, they started down the hill to the city. Garion rode at the rear, trying to ignore the ghosts rising from the earth to confront him with their nudity and their hideous maiming. The wailing sound, which they had heard from the moment they had entered Maragor, grew louder and more distinct. The wail had sometimes seemed to be a chorus, confused and distorted by echoes. But now, Garion realized, it was one single mighty voice, filled with a grief so vast that it reverberated through all of the kingdom. As they approached the city, a terrible wind seemed to come up, deadly chill, and filled with an overpowering charnel house stench. As Garion reached automatically to draw his cloak tighter about him, he saw that the cloak did not in any way react to the wind. Nor did the tall grass through which they rode bend before it. He considered it. If the wind did not move the grass, it could not be a real wind. Furthermore, if the horses could not hear the wails, they could not be real wailing either. He grew colder and shivered, even as he told himself that the chill, like the wind and the grief-laden howling, was spiritual rather than real. Although Mar Ammon, when he had first glimpsed it from the top of the hill, had appeared to be in total ruin, when they entered the city, Garion was startled to see the substantial walls of houses and public buildings surrounding him, and somewhere not far away he seemed to hear the sound of laughing children. There was also the sound of singing off in the distance.
"Why does he keep doing this?" Aunt Paul asked sadly. "It doesn't do any good."
"It's all he has, Paul," Mr. Wolf replied.
"It always ends the same, though."
"I know. But for a little while it helps him to forget."
"There are things we would all like to forget, Father. This is not the way to do it."
Wolf looked admiringly at the substantial seeming houses around them.
"It is very good, you know."
"Naturally. He is a god, after all. But it's still not good for him."
It was not until Barak's horse inadvertently stepped directly through one of the walls, disappearing through the solid-looking stone and then re-emerging several yards farther down the street, that Garion understood what his aunt and grandfather were talking about. The walls, the buildings, the whole city was an illusion, a memory. The chill wind, with its stink of corruption, seemed to grow stronger and carried with it now the added reek of smoke. Though Garion could still see the sunlight shining brightly on the grass, it seemed for some reason that it was growing noticeably darker. The laughter of the children and the distant singing faded. Garion heard screams. A Tolnedran legionnaire, in burnished breastplate and plumed helmet, as solid-looking as the walls around them, came running down the long curve of the street. His sword dripped blood, his face was fixed in a hideous grin, and his eyes were wild. Hacked and mutilated bodies sprawled in the street now, and there was blood everywhere. The wailing climbed into a piercing shriek as the illusion moved on toward its dreadful climax. The spiral street opened at last into the broad circular plaza at the center of Mar Ammon. The icy wind seemed to howl through the burning city, and the dreadful sounds of swords chopping through flesh and bone seemed to fill Garion's entire mind. The air grew even darker. The stones of the plaza were thick with the illusory memory of uncounted scores of Marag dead, lying beneath rolling clouds of dense smoke. But what stood in the center of the plaza was not an illusion, nor even a ghost. The figure towered, and seemed to shimmer with a terrible presence, a reality that was in no way dependent upon the mind of the observer for its existence. In its arms, it held the body of a slaughtered child that seemed somehow to be the sum and total of all of the dead of haunted Maragor, and its face, lifted in anguish above the body of that dead child, was ravaged by an expression of inhuman grief. The figure wailed, and Garion, even in the half-somnolent state that protected his sanity, felt the hair on the back of his neck trying to rise in horror. Mr. Wolf grimaced and climbed down from his saddle. Carefully stepping over the illusions of bodies littering the plaza, he approached the enormous presence.
"Lord Mara,"
he said, respectfully bowing to the figure. Mara howled.
"Lord Mara,"
Wolf said again.
"I would not lightly intrude myself upon thy grief, but I must speak with thee."
The dreadful face contorted, and great tears streamed down the god's cheeks. Wordlessly, Mara held out the body of the child, and lifted his face, and wailed.
"Lord Mara,"
Wolf tried once again, more insistent this time. Mara closed his eyes and bowed his head, sobbing over the body of the child.
"It's useless, Father,"
Aunt Paul told the old man.
"When he's like this, you cannot reach him."
"Leave me, Belgariad,"
Mara said, still weeping. His huge voice rolled and throbbed in Garion's mind.
"Leave me to my grief."
"Lord Mara,"
The day of the fulfillment of the prophecy is at hand.
What is that to me? Mara sobbed, clutching the body of the child closer. Will the prophecy restore my slaughtered children? I am beyond its reach. Leave me alone.
The fate of the world hinges upon the outcome of events, which will happen very soon, Lord Mara. The kingdoms of East and West are girding for the last war, and Torek One-Eye, thine accursed brother, stirs in his slumber and will soon awaken.
Let him awaken, Mara replied, and bowed down over the body in his arms as a storm of fresh weeping swept over him.
Wilt thou then submit to his dominion, Lord Mara?
Aunt Paul asked him. I am beyond his dominion, Belgariad. I will not leave this land of my murdered children, and no man nor God will intrude upon me here. Let Torek have the world if he wants it.
We might as well leave, Father. Nothing's going to move him.
Lord Mara, Mr. Wolf said to the weeping god, we have brought before thee the instruments of prophecy. Wilt thou bless them before we go?
I have no blessings, Belgariad, Mara replied. Only curses for the savage children of Nedra. Take these strangers and go.
Lord Mara, Aunt Paul said firmly, a part is reserved for thee in the working out of the prophecy. The iron destiny which compels us all compels thee as well. Each must play that part laid out for him from the beginning of days, for in the day that the prophecy is turned aside from its terrible course, the world will be unmade.
Let it be unmade, Mara groaned. It holds no more joy for me. So, let it perish. My grief is eternal, and I will not abandon it, though the cost be the unmaking of all that has been made. Take these children of the prophecy, and depart. Mr. Wolf bowed with resignation, turned and came back toward the rest of them. His expression registered a certain hopeless disgust. "Wait!" Mara roared suddenly. The images of the city and its dead wavered and shimmered away. "What is this?" the god demanded. Mr. Wolf turned quickly. "What hast thou done, Belgariad?" Mara accused, suddenly towering into immensity. "And thou, Belgariad, is my grief now an amusement for thee? Wilt thou cast my sorrow into my teeth?" "My lord," Aunt Paul seemed taken aback by the god's sudden fury. "Monstrous!" Mara roared. "Monstrous!" His huge face convulsed with rage. In terrible anger he strode toward them and then stopped, directly in front of the horse of Princess Zenedra. "I will rend thy flesh," he shrieked at her. "I will fill thy brain with the worms of madness, daughter of Nedra. I will sink thee in torment and horror for all the days of thy life." "Leave her alone," Aunt Paul said sharply. "Nay, Belgariad, upon her will fall the brunt of my wrath." His dreadful, clutching fingers reached out toward the uncomprehending princess, but she stared blankly through him, unflinching and unaware. The god hissed with frustration and whirled to confront Mr. Wolf. "Tricked!" he howled at him.
Her mind is asleep. They are all asleep, Lord Mara. Threats and horrors do not mean anything to them. Shriek and howl until the sky falls down. She cannot hear thee. I will punish thee for this, Belgariad, and Polgar as well. You will all taste pain and terror for this arrogant despite of me. I will wring the sleep from the minds of these intruders, and they will know the agony and madness I will visit upon them all." He swelled suddenly into vastness.
"That's enough, Mara. Stop!"
The voice was Gerion's, but Gerion knew that it was not he who spoke. The spirit of Mara turned on him, raising his vast arm to strike, but Gerion felt himself slide from his horse to approach the vast, threatening figure. "Your vengeance stops here, Mara," the voice coming from Gerion's mouth said. "The girl is bound to my purpose. You will not touch her." Gerion realized with a certain alarm that he had been placed between the raging god and the sleeping princess.
"Move out of my way, boy, lest I slay thee,"
Mara threatened.
"Use your mind, Mara," the voice told him. "If you haven't howled it empty by now. You know who I am."
"I will have her. I will give her a multitude of lives and tear each one from her quivering flesh."
"No,"
the voice replied.
"You won't." The god Mera drew himself up again, raising his dreadful arms, but at the same time his eyes were probing, and more than his eyes. Gerion once again felt a vast touch on his mind, as he had in Queen Salmistra's throne room when the spirit of Issa had touched him. A dreadful recognition began to dawn in Mara's weeping eyes. His raised arms fell.
"Give her to me. Take the others and go, but give the Tonedron to me. I beg it of thee."
"No."
What happened then was not sorcery. Gerion knew it instantly. The noise was not there, nor that strange rushing surge that always accompanied sorcery. Instead, there seemed to be a terrible pressure as the full force of Mara's mind was directed crushingly at him. Then the mind within his mind responded. The power was so vast that the world itself was not large enough to contain it. It did not strike back at Mara, for that dreadful collision would have shattered the world, but it stood rather calmly unmoved and immovable against the raging torrent of Mara's fury. For a fleeting moment Gerion shared the awareness of the mind within his mind, and he shuddered back from its immensity. In that instant he saw the birth of uncounted suns swirling in vast spirals against the velvet blackness of the void, their birth and gathering into galaxies and ponderously turning nebula, encompassing but a moment. And beyond that, he looked full in the face of time itself, seeing its beginning and its ending in one awful glimpse. Mara fell back.
"I must submit,"
he said hoarsely, and then he bowed to Gerion, his ravaged face strangely humble. He turned away and buried his face in his hands, weeping uncontrollably.
"Your grief will end, Mara,"
the voice said gently.
"One day you will find joy again."
"Never,"
the god sobbed.
"My grief will last forever."
"Forever's a very long time, Mara," the voice replied, "and only I can see the end of it." The weeping god did not answer, but moved away from them, and the sound of his wailing echoed again through the ruins of Mar Emon.
Mr. Wolf and Aunt Paul were both staring at Geryon with stunned faces. When the old man spoke, his voice was awed.
"Is it possible?"
Aren't you the one who keeps saying that anything is possible, Belgariad? We didn't know you could intervene directly,
Aunt Paul said. I nudge things a bit from time to time, make a few suggestions. If you think back carefully, you might even remember some of them.
Is the boy aware of any of this?
Of course. We had a little talk about it.
How much did you tell him?
As much as he could understand. Don't worry, Belgariad. I'm not going to hurt him. He realizes how important all of this is now. He knows that he needs to prepare himself, and that he doesn't have a great deal of time for it. I think you had better leave here now. The Tolnedran girl's presence is causing Mera a great deal of pain. Aunt Paul looked as if she wanted to say more, but she glanced once at the shadowy figure of the god weeping not far away, and nodded. She turned to her horse and led the way out of the ruins. Mr. Wolf fell in beside Geryon after they had remounted to follow her.
"Perhaps we could talk as we rode along," he suggested. "I have a great many questions."
He's gone, grandfather,
Geryon told him.
"Oh,"
Wolf answered with obvious disappointment. It was nearing sundown by then, and they stopped for the night in a grove about a mile away from Mar Emon. Since they had left the ruins, they had seen no more of the maimed ghosts. After the others had been fed and sent to their blankets, Aunt Paul, Geryon, and Mr. Wolf sat around their small fire. Since the presence in his mind had left him, following the meeting with Mara, Geryon had felt himself sinking deeper toward sleep. All emotion was totally gone now, and he seemed no longer able to think independently.
"Can we talk to the, other one?"
Mr. Wolf asked hopefully.
He's not there right now,
Geryon replied.
"Then he's not always with you?"
Not always. Sometimes he goes away for months, sometimes even longer. He's been there for quite a long while this time, ever since Asherak burned up.
"Where exactly is he when he's with you?"
the old man asked curiously. Geryon tapped his head.
In here. Have you been awake ever since we entered Maragor?
Aunt Paul asked.
Not exactly awake,
Geryon yawned.
Part of me was asleep. You could see the ghosts? Yes. But they didn't frighten you? No. Some of them surprised me, and one of them made me sick.
Wolf looked up quickly.
"It wouldn't make you sick now, though, would it?"
No, I don't think so. Right at first I could still feel things like that a little bit. Now I can't.
Wolf looked thoughtfully at the fire, as if looking for a way to phrase his next question.
"What did the other one in your head say to you when you talked together?"
He told me that something had happened a long time ago that wasn't supposed to happen, and that I was supposed to fix it.
Wolf laughed shortly.
"That's a succinct way of putting it. Did he say anything about how it was going to turn out?"
He doesn't know.
Wolf sighed.
"I had hoped that maybe we'd picked up an advantage somewhere, but I guess not. It looks like both prophecies are still equally valid."
Aunt Paul was looking steadily at Geryon.
Do you think you will be able to remember any of this when you wake up again? I think so.
All right, then. Listen carefully. There are two prophecies, both leading toward the same event. The Grolams and the rest of the Angaraks are following one. We are following the other. The event turns out differently at the end of each prophecy.
I see,
he yawned.
Nothing in either prophecy excludes anything that will happen in the other until they meet in that event. The course of everything that follows will be decided by how that event turns out. One prophecy will succeed, the other will fail. Everything that has happened and will happen comes together at that point and becomes one. The mistake will be erased, and the universe will go in one direction or the other, as if that were the direction it had been going from its very beginning. The only real difference is that something that is very important will never happen if we fail.
Garion nodded, feeling suddenly very tired.
Belden calls it the theory of convergent destinies,
Mr. Wolf said.
2 equally possible possibilities. Oh, Belden can be very pompous sometimes.
It's not an uncommon failing, Father,
Aunt Paul told him.
I think I'd like to sleep now,
Garion said. Wolf and Aunt Paul exchanged a quick glance.
All right,
Aunt Paul said. She rose and took him by the arm and led him to his blankets. After she had covered him, drawing the blankets up snugly, she laid one cool hand on his forehead.
"Sleep, my Belgarian,"
she murmured. And he did.